Hey, it's Tuesday. Today I want to keep looking at that book I started with yesterday, looking at some of the stuff in the radically collaborative patterns for software makers. Now, if you want to get this, if I've done my work, there'll be a little thing over there, kind of probably in that area, that you can go click on, and you can download this book for free. I'll try to put a link at the very end of the video as well. And you can always go to kote.io/Tanzu Talk and find the show notes for this and find a link. But it's it's a nice book going over all sorts of the techniques and ways of thinking that we use in our Pivotal Labs practice. You can see a kind of overview of types of ideas there, all sorts of things. Yesterday I went over the the discovery and framing, which I think is a great way to figure out things that you want to discover, features to work on in your software. I don't know. But today I was reading through it in order, as I like doing, and I came across there's this part of facilitation, which actually, as you can tell, goes from 20 pages, quite a beefy section. And this goes over two things that I want to go over. One, a general structure for it almost, you might use this in your discovery, where you're trying to discover things to work on. But it goes over a process for doing that I've seen a couple times, and I think it's good. If you remember another episode, one of my sort of, as I tell my kids when I say this kind of stuff, dad phrases, whatever you want to call it, parental unit phrases, is basically doing something is better than doing nothing. And I think the process that's gone over here in this section actually is a good process. But even if you think it's weird or whatever, chances are you're not really doing anything in these kind of meetings. And instead you're having, as it's called here, a battle of wills, where people are just sort of talking or whatever. But there's a good technique to kind of whittle down, to make a decision, to decide to do something based on priorities that you have. So let's go to that section and kind of meander around in it a little bit and check out what's going there. Now, first, as you can see, I want to speak to this idea. It sounds a little corny, but this point A to point B thing, which I think, to broaden a little bit, I think it's worth thinking a lot about what the corporate meeting is. Now, meetings, I've been in a lot of corporate meetings. I think it is a huge benefit of my life that I no longer have to attend too many meetings. When you do a daily video thing like this, when you go out and you do presentations, when you do the type of work that I do, in reflection, I've spent a lot of time structuring a career where I don't have to be in a lot of meetings, which is great for me. But to be fair, most people who are working in a corporate setting, right? If you're not producing something, you're not working on creation of stuff like I am. A lot of the time what you're doing is you're deciding on priorities, deciding on things to do, collaborating with people to optimize the process, constantly going through and discovering what to do next, moving, as the book calls it, from point A to point B. Now, I like to think of this as, so a meeting is where this stuff happens, right? Where you, as I like to think about it, meetings are to reach a decision, right? Sometimes meetings are to review the status of things, see how things are going, which is fine. That's good as well. But the valuable meetings are all about coming to a decision to do something, either an individual or a group, or a decision not to do something. But you're doing your daily operations of a business, and you want to decide what to do next. And I think that's a little bit my interpretation of this idea of framing, if you will, the model of what you're doing in a meeting, or what you're doing when you're collaborating with people, and especially when there's someone who's a facilitator, the person running the meeting. And what you want that, I'll say facilitator, what you want that facilitator to do is have an idea of what the end goal is, what point B is, right? And this doesn't need to be a specific thing, but in the example, that the kind of tool that we'll go over here from the book, the end goal is we need to decide on one project to work on, one app to work on, one feature to work on, one strategic business idea to work on, right? If you'll remember the story that I've told a few times when I was doing one of these kind of Pivotal Lab style meetings, we were at a retailer, like a big US retailer, and the point B in the meeting that they ended up doing was they decided that they would focus on they had a category of buyers who were like pro buyers, like consultants or contractors or whatever, and they decided that they wanted to make a better loyalty program for these pro buyers versus people like me who would we would just buy our consumery kind of goods and, do our la-di-da stuff. But they didn't have a good loyalty program for this other category of buyers who spent most of the money, who spent a significant amount of money with them and were a very important part of their business. And they couldn't get the boost of, customer loyalty and also revenue from having a loyalty program there. So that was the point B that they reached. Now, more abstractly, the point B they were shooting for was like, what's something valuable that we can work on? So I think, there's two things wrapped up in there that you can read about in the book here. One is this idea of a facilitator, right? Someone who's helping facilitate or run the meeting and kind of move things along, right? Which I've been in many corporate meetings and there is rarely a facilitator, right? Like it's usually the, what's the funny name for this? Most senior person in the room in MSP? That's not what it is. But like whoever the most senior person in the room is sort of tasked with facilitating it, which is probably a terrible choice for someone to facilitate it. Because a lot of what a facilitator needs to do is to kind of move people along and kind of like balance out authority in the room and things like that. So it's probably good to have someone kind of run the meeting. Now, of course, we at Pivotal Labs, when you're trying to figure out how to improve your meeting and do things like this, it's probably pretty good to, it's nice to get some outsider to come in, maybe help train you up. It might be nice eventually if you get to the maturity where you can kind of cycle through who your facilitators are. If you had everyone who's normally in your room deciding things had the ability to be a facilitator, that would probably be, maybe after 6 or 8 months, a pretty phenomenal, conclusion that you would have gotten to. So that's like the first framing from this book. Now I'm scrolling through a whole lot of other stuff, but you can get the book for free and read a lot more about the idea of what a facilitator does and kind of like there's some interesting stuff in the book about kind of like what you're doing is filtering down and some good anecdotes. And as always, there's the no laptops and no phone stuff, which has got to be really difficult nowadays when you do remote work. But whatever. So the next thing to go over, I'm just kind of going to, summarize these things in a lot of my own words. But in this style of meeting that the book covers really nicely and kind of gives some guidelines for what you're doing in your meeting setting. And this typically is probably a meeting that lasts much longer than an hour. It might be 2 hours or even a half day or longer. Is you're trying to think about, all right, so we want to improve the way our business operates by using software. I mean, the same thing I'm always talking about. Software is like the apps that we write, the way that we add our features, whether used internally or used by our customer base. It's kind of like the chief way we operate our business and therefore innovate the business. So what we need to decide at every level, right? Starting from the top, we need to decide big strategic initiatives that we have, like adding that loyalty card, working on like curbside pickup, or entering a new market to sell insurance, or if you're going in and as commonly happens, you're modernizing a whole bunch of applications, you need to decide which applications to start with. Like one of the more famous cases we have is with the U.S. Air Force, and they had all sorts of projects, as you can imagine, to modernize in their air operation control. And there are many of them that had been, they've been working with government contractors, for like 5 years or more, and nothing had ever shipped. So they needed to go through and decide, which applications to actually modernize. So that picking those out is, that's a laudable goal to have and something good to start with. You could even think on a smaller team level and say like, so what features are important to add to this release of the software, or what general features are good for us to pay attention to, or workflows are part of the what would you call it? I don't know. How are we going to expand the business out? I lost track of my train of thought there, so I just filled it with some words. But anyhow, so that's this kind. I don't know what, I forget if the book goes through and names this kind of meeting, but let's just call it a decision meeting, deciding to do something. Which again, probably should be a lot of the meetings that you have, rather than just status meetings where you're going over things. So the first, I think one of the concepts that's interesting, the way that Parker here puts it together, is this idea of going from many to one, right? So you're going to have a whole lot of options and a whole lot of ideas, a whole lot of people involved. And the goal that you have, the point B, is to have one problem to solve, one thing to do. And I think, it can seem limiting, as we'll get into, to focus on just one thing. And it seems like you're forgetting and cutting away a bunch of stuff. And there's all sorts of stuff to psychologically deal with the things that are not your number one priority, right? Like in the getting things done methodology, you have like this inbox or this kind of slush thing, or some people call it a icebox in Kanban things, where you can just capture or log or just keep ideas so that you don't really delete them. And in kind of your own like personal life, when you prioritize things, you use a similar sort of thing of like, oh, just write it down and keep like a box, metaphorically or literally, of the things that you want to do, and go, and to, make you feel like you're not deleting them more, go back and revisit them frequently. And kind of like, at whatever period of time, you can prioritize and pick things that you want to work on, which is fine. But I think, again, in trying to actually move, oftentimes what I find is it's okay just to forget things. You can just especially when it comes to priorities and projects to work on and things like that. And so a lot of what's going on in this way of kind of having a decision meeting is really making people focus on coming up with just one thing and not really worry about all this other stuff that kind of distracts them. It's the old phrase of when you decide to do everything, you decide to do nothing. The way this starts off is one, and there's a good trick here that I'll go over, is the first thing you do is you get everyone in the room and you basically say, all right, we want to think about ways of improving our business. Or, like I was saying in a small thing, we want to think about what would be a good feature to add to our software that would improve our users' experience with it, or whatever. What is the thing we want to work on, right? And let's just go with I'll use the example about the loyalty card thing to kind of as a running example here. But so what's an initiative that we could start, an application that we could start, a project, if you will, what's the best thing that we could work on now that would help the business out? So what you do first is you say, all right, let's have everyone write down 10 ideas, right? And, just spend time doing that on your own. And the explanation of there's all sorts of mind tricks, to use the cynical phrasing. The way that it's phrased through here, there's a lot of if you read through this section, you'll see that a lot of the techniques used in this meeting are based on psychological safety, which, I'm always a little leery of soft things like psychological safety. But I think as kind of just in background explained here, a lot of the friction that's involved in people collaborating, using the collective intelligence and the decision making that you'll have in a group, it's halted by a lack of psychological safety. So one, kind of like me, people won't say stuff because they don't want to be embarrassed by bad ideas or be condemned by bad ideas, right? In most of the corporate world, there's no tolerance for wrong things or worse things. You have to come with the right answer all the time, right? You're often even told not to even complain unless you have a solution to offer, which, then later on when managers and leaders are shocked that no one told them that things were going on poorly, they just obviously no one told them because maybe they didn't have a way of solving it, right? It's a problem that someone above them needed to solve that was above their pay rank. So because they don't have some solution to solve, why are they going to tell anyone that there's a problem if you're always supposed to bring a solution to the problem? But there's a lot of sort of ways of running these decision meetings that Parker goes over that are about kind of getting over that psychological safety. And this sitting down as individuals and coming up with 10 ideas is one interesting way of doing it, right? Now, I like the trick kind of used here, right? That sometimes people will sit down and say I don't really have ideas, right? But you give them almost a minimum amount. You say you need to come up with 10. So even if they're bad ideas, right? Because everyone's always got lots of ideas. Even if they're bad ideas, just write them down so you can fill out my quota, right? Now, the next part that it kind of like is the trick here, and I, it might be, I guess it's as effective if people know what's happening, because once you get the psychological safety of being able to write down all of your ideas, you don't realize this mind trick coming up. The next thing that occurs once everyone writes down their 10 ideas is you have them rank the top 5 ideas that they have, right? So rank all these from like what you think is most important to least important, and then take the bottom 5. And I don't know if you literally do this, but it'd be fun. Take the bottom 5 and hand it to the person to your left, and then I guess you wait until they do that, and you say, "All right, person to the left, now rip up those ideas." And that must be thrilling the first time it happens to someone. But the point there again is back to what I was saying: is like we need to come up with one idea. We needed a way to kind of encourage people to get, as they say, their juices flowing and thinking about things, and we also need a way to sort of like get them into a brainstorming mood over time. And so when we do this, one, we've encouraged them to come up with a bunch of things, but two, we're also showing this physical act of prioritization, which I think would have some interesting kind of implications to it. Now, if you're online and using something like Miro or even a Trello board or whatever, like ripping those things up might be a little more difficult. Maybe you move them to the trash. I don't know. But, I think doing that silent generation stuff is probably, when I've seen it in action, it's quite helpful, right? Because instead of verbally doing it, even having the facilitator go up on the whiteboard and write things down, like it'll capture, it has the maximal capturing of people who would contribute, right? People who are vocal and just interested, extrovert, as we say, like they'll contribute, and people in a spoken word sort of thing. But people like myself who are quiet or just like, I don't know, don't really care, which is a weird way of putting it, but just like, they're more likely to get involved if they can work on their own. And I think the vocal people will do this just fine as well. So then the next thing that you go through is, and there's some more tricks of like getting people to go up to a wall to stand up and do things. But the next example is to have everyone kind of go over, kind of read what the items are, right? As I recall, you don't really even explain what they are. And you kind of read what the items are. And if you as one of the readers, like, well, I skipped a thing. When you have this wall, the facilitator puts all these things up on the wall, right? I forget if at this point, I don't think you really even order them in priority. I guess it would be hard if you don't understand them. So the facilitator puts them up on the wall, and then the next thing is all the people kind of silently read them to themselves. And this is I'd kind of forgotten about this point, but it's kind of interesting, which is like if someone has a question, I'm kind of mixing up the order of this stuff, but whatever. If someone has a question, they can put a little sticky dot on it. And they don't even really say what the question is, but that basically means like when we go through this, let's have everyone kind of go over. If there's a sticky dot on yours, especially if there's a lot of sticky dots, then they need to kind of explain it and talk about what that idea is. And I suppose you could go through each idea and have each person explain it. That could be another step that you go through. But I kind of like this idea of even further sorting. That we're only going to spend time discussing the ones that someone had a question about, that they didn't really understand what it was. Now, there would be a danger there in that people might have a different interpretation of what it meant than the person originally understood. But I don't know. It does seem like a nice way of kind of filtering out more stuff. So then, of course, you move, as always, to a 2x2 matrix. Now, this is kind of like a variant of the Eisenhower matrix. It's a variant in that things are slightly out of order. Like your classic Eisenhower matrix is, what is it? The axes don't matter that much, but it's urgency and importance, right? And that means anytime in this, I shouldn't use this one, but in the upper right-hand quadrant, that allows you to find things that are urgent and important, which are things you should work on now. But it also allows you to find things that are important but not urgent, which are things you don't want to forget. And I forget the exact ordering of the quadrant, but Eisenhower matrix is another way of looking at prioritization. But I like this one for these kind of projects, which is, again, we're trying to pick one thing to work on, right? And so you want to find the easy wins at first, right? And those easy wins will be things that are easy to work on, but that are very important for customers, right? As opposed to things that are hard to work on, but are important for customers. And so, you have people go along, everyone takes their 5 items and they go and put them up there in the quadrants that they think they belong in, right? So they all do that. And then, again, you're trying to find the easy and hard things. And, inevitably, as pointed out, a lot of the things end up in the upper quadrants like this, right? And so I remember seeing this trick in action. It's great. See, I got the dot voting out of order, but whatever. But what the facilitator does, and this is also why I think it's, one of the examples of why it's good to have a third person, is they can just go in, and because no one kind of had the ability to force themselves to prioritize stuff below the line, because we all know if it's below the line, we're not going to do it, right? Like, that's just what's going to happen. But there's kind of an implicit line here, right? So the facilitator just goes through and moves the line up, boom. And then we've kind of further sorted things down into the area we think they should belong in. So then, like I was saying, if you want to, you can come in and do some dot voting to kind of figure out, like, let's vote on the ones that we think are actually important, and or if we have questions for them. It's kind of like this ongoing process of things that you can find. I should probably have gone and looked up dot voting stuff more, but you should go check out the book there. So then, let's say you're around 7, you're finally reduced down with all this sorting and moving lines around and even dot voting and whatnot. You've got about 7 of these ideas left, on sticky notes. And, because Post-it is trademarked, everyone always says sticky note, but it's, Post-it notes, as most people would call it. So we'll go back to the trademark friendly thing. So you've got your sticky notes and you found like 7 or less. So then I think this is another area where it's good to have a facilitator doing it versus the most senior person in the room. And what they do is they decide on just a ordering based on the conversation was going on of most important to least important. And then you can have more of a discussion, right, amongst people. As it says, does this look right? The ordering that we have here. You can have discussion on each. People can kind of talk about each one. And, eventually you want to end up with, finding out more of the nuanced meaning of things. And again, the goal you're getting to is to decide when to work on. Now, there's a lot of mind tricks, to use my phrase again, in play here, right? At this point, as we're getting closer to the decision, people haven't put their names on the stickies. You probably know, because they've defined it and talked about it, like who wrote what. But you've gone through this collective. As a group, you've decided what's important, what's not important. You've kind of had a collective understanding of what the things are. And to some extent, you're sort of like not thinking about these sticky notes attached to a person or maybe even sort of like a business. Now, obviously, you are, right? Like, you'll know whose thing is whose, but there's more of a collective ownership that you have of these things, which hopefully allows you to discuss things, a lot easier than if you were just, waiting for the authorities in the room to say things, or even kind of advocating for your own stuff, right? You're more talking through, the things on their own merit, right? And so I think that, once you get to this point, this is where you have the type of meeting that normally you would have if you just came with a list of stuff, right? Where you're somehow deciding like a big bucket of stuff to go through. But, you've had instead a very structured way of going through it in a kind of using the tools that you have there. Now, there's all sorts of other stuff, like the kind of materials that you need and stuff like that. And I think there was one in particular stuff like these kind of sections, you don't often see this in books like this, which is, as I read more of this books, one of the things that makes it nice. But there's a little section on how do you get to the point where you can do this, right? Like, how do you build up that habit or kind of bootstrap into that? And there's about 3 things in there. I mean, this is a small thing, right? But this idea of kind of bootstrapping people into it and getting them comfortable is just a simple thing that you tell people, right? You almost tell them the trick of generating 10 notes, and you say, it does seem like we're going to be 10 ideas is difficult, but it's a way of making sure that you kind of start up the process of thinking, right? So even if it's bad ideas, having a bad idea will help you generate good ones because it'll get your brain and just in that position where you're generating ideas, right? And this is a trick of like creative stuff everywhere, right? And non-creative things that like you just need to like start, right? Like coming up with good ideas or doing good habits or just doing anything often means just like pick some entry point and start doing it. Because once you start doing it, you know what the next step is and the next step, right? And this is, if you've read there's a good book. Usually I don't like these kind of books, but that Atomic Habits book is pretty good. And one of the things that he says is similar to this is just like, especially when it comes to like physical activity, right? Like it's important to kind of do something daily, even if you're terrible at doing it, right? Even if it doesn't go well, because you need to, one, keep that flow up of doing things, because that's how you basically just start, right? So even if you know that it's going to go poorly and you're not going to do well, just start doing it, and at least you'll be in the habit of doing it over and over again. And similarly, when you're coming up with these 10 ideas or whatever, even if it's bad ideas that you have, at least you'll be started and you'll kind of be on the path to, hopefully come up with some good ones. And if you don't come up with good ones, then whatever, right? So that's a good, it's nice to kind of explain that, like, even if it's bad, write it down. Because again, people often are not in the right kind of mindset for brainstorming, right? Like they only want to have good ideas out there. And I guess, it doesn't necessarily cover it here, but if you think about that from the other perspective, it also helps level set with the rest of the group that you're going to hear and maybe see some bad ideas, right, from other people. But that was just a way to get people started thinking about stuff. So don't like think poorly of someone because they came up with bad ideas, because this is a tool that we're using to do things. So it kind of level sets on both sides of the table of I don't want to be vulnerable and expose bad ideas that I have because I'm always supposed to only have the best ideas. But then also if you're the judger, right, like then I'm not going to be judging people's the quality of their ideas and making it reflect on them because we're generating ideas and just coming up with whatever. So, I skipped over some details and probably got some things slightly wrong, but that's why you can go in and get a copy of this book for free, right? You can read in more detail what's going on there. There's even several blog posts about like how to do dot voting and all sorts of things like that. But I would encourage you to get a copy of this book. If you just go to kote.io/Tanzu Talk, you can find the show notes for this episode and download it. Speaking of things that you could do, are you of the mindset that you'd like to dig into a lot more of these things? I bet you are. So what you can do is there's a couple of things. One, if you're interested in figuring out how to do software development better, even some of that product management and kind of exploring what you want to do with your software, we've got a great resource for you over here at tanzu.vmware.com/developer. You can see all these topics you can jump into, from technical things to more of the type of stuff I was going over, agile thinking and process. Now, if you're coming from the operations end, you can also go to kube.academy, and we have all sorts of free training for figuring out how to run Kubernetes, do cloud native development. You can even look at some of these things for let's call it for super free. They're all free, but for super free without actually having to even make an account. And then some of the other things you just have to create an account for, which is totally free, whatever. Most people that I talk with and that you see in surveys, when they're thinking about getting better at software, they want to put that cloud native, container driven way of doing things in place, often Kubernetes and a platform as a service on top. And they bemoan that they can't hire the right people, that there aren't the right skills out there for them to find. And if you're managing people like that, or you're one of these people, you could do a whole lot worse, as we like to say back in my neck of the woods, than going here and going through the courses. This will give you an excellent baseline of what's going on there, and I'd really recommend it. Obviously, I work there, so I'm biased, but it's good stuff, and it's all free. And then finally, if you're interested in, if you like that facilitation idea of how to do things, again, like I've been in meetings all the way up to the C-suite people of doing this, and I saw it when I was in London last time with a group of people trying to they use this technique to figure out how to put together the business case for using Tanzu application server. They wanted to figure out what's the best way to pitch the business case for why we should put all this effort and money into transforming the way that we do software. And they use that same facilitated technique of kind of ferreting down to the number one problem and associated ones to solve. I mean, there's no reason you have to stick with just one problem. You can pick whichever, however many you want, but you want to make sure you've ordered them nicely. But if you go to cote.pizza, you can scroll down to this office hours thing right here and fill that out. And we could talk for an hour, half a day or whatever, but we can kind of help sort out what you got going on and how we could help you out there. To use another Texanism, could. So with that, as always, if you've enjoyed this, it's always very helpful if you help me spread the word around. Just, promote it, email it, put it in your Twitter, your LinkedIn or whatever. I post it all the time, so you can go retweet or share the one I have in Twitter or LinkedIn, whatever. I just want eyeballs. And also it impresses the people I work with, which is nice. Good to impress people. Look at that handsome guy there. Big old Popeye arms almost. I got to get that elbow jutting out some more. But you can just go to cote.io/Tanzu Talk. And with that, bye-bye. We'll see everyone tomorrow.